I'm in Winchester, a city in sunny Hampshire, in the southeast of England. Before London, Winchester was once the capital, being the seat of government for the Norman kings until after the 12th century. After William defeated Harold Godwinson at Hastings in 1066, he marched to Winchester to sack the royal treasury and build one of England's first Norman castles. But there is another story that happens here that's often forgotten about. Let me take you back to the early morning of the 31st of May, 1076. Here, on St Giles Hill, which looks over the city of Winchester and its cathedral, Wolthioff, the last Anglo-Saxon Earl of England, threw himself onto his knees and burst into the Lord's Prayer in an attempt for God's forgiveness. According to some medieval sources, it was said that the executioner got tired of waiting for him to finish, so struck off his head while he was in the middle of the last sentence, and lead us not into temptation. Witnesses swore that his severed head on the floor finished the sentence with, "But deliver us from evil. Amen." Of course, one man's traitor is another man's freedom fighter, and it wasn't long before the unhappy Saxons were ready to call Wolthioff a saint. To understand why he met his bloody end in Winchester, we need to go back to the beginning of 1075, where a revolt against William was brewing.
This revolt was different primarily because Normans were involved. It was initiated by two Normans who were descended from companions of William the Conqueror.
The first of these companions was the son of an Anglo-Norman, Ralph de Gale. Ralph's father was rewarded with lands in East Anglia by William in 1066, where we are today, and when he died, gave his lands to Ralph himself, making him the Earl of East Anglia by 1075. You also have the son of a loyal Norman called Fitz Osborne, Roger de Brettel. Fitz Osborne was made Earl of Hereford in 1066, and when he died, he also gave his land to his son Roger, making him the Earl of Hereford by 1075. However, on both occasions, King William took land from Ralph and Roger, reducing their earldom. This obviously made them resent William. The third person involved in the revolt was Wolthioff, the Saxon who in 1066 was the Earl of Northamptonshire. After submitting to William, he was then allowed to keep his earldom. In 1069, however, he was part of the rebellions in the north of England who teamed up with Edgar Atheling, but again submitted to William and was later made Earl of Northumbria in 1072.
So the beginnings of the revolt can be traced back to an enormous wedding feast that was being held for the wedding between Ralph and Roger's sister Emma, which actually wasn't necessarily sanctioned by William, which was something that kings liked to, be sure of. So this was a good opportunity for Ralph and Roger to consolidate their lands, which were on the other side of England from each other, and sort of, put their power together. Now, one of the key guests at this wedding was Wolthioff, and he became this relatively reluctant co-conspirator. Perhaps his invitation was given so that they could try and get him on side, knowing him to be a previous detractor of William, someone who'd rebelled against him before.
Between them, their land stretched from east to west and from the far north to the Midlands. During this wedding feast of Ralph and Emma, their plan was hatched for a point where William was back in Normandy with Archbishop Lanfranc in charge of the country. This combination of these three earls, with Ralph and Roger being the ringleaders, looked very promising. But the revolt was defeated before it even really began.
The revolt failed for a number of reasons. Firstly, these Norman earls did not get a lot of support from their surrounding lands, from their local tenants, and from their neighbours. There was a promise of a Danish fleet arriving to support this rebellion. However, the Danes were slow, didn't turn up in time. By the time they got there, the revolt had pretty much been quashed. But the real big problem they faced was that Wolthioff, perhaps for reasons that he'd been defeated several times by William before and fearing the subsequent consequences, he betrays the rebels, and he goes to Lanfranc, the Archbishop, who is currently regent while William is away in Normandy, and he confesses, and Lanfranc sends him to Normandy to confess to William.
Lanfranc sent men to find out what was happening in the earldoms of Hereford and East Anglia, who reported that the rebels were apparently strengthening their castle defences and building up their armies. After Lanfranc failed to convince Roger not to revolt by reminding him of how loyal his father had been, he excommunicated him from the church, forcing him to give up his plans. Meanwhile, preparations were being made to counter the revolt. In the west, Bishop Wulfstan of Worcester and the Abbot of Evesham used their troops to prevent Roger crossing the River Severn, stopping him from leaving Herefordshire. The same thing happened in the east, where we are today, with the Normans and Anglo-Saxons joining together to stop Ralph from breaking out of his earldom in East Anglia.
The rebellion is actually largely put down by loyalist barons and Lanfranc's kind of quick thinking before William gets a chance to return. So a number of the big names sort of fence in Ralph and Roger. They prevent them from getting anywhere near each other. They prevent them from taking too much space. And by the time William has got back, these guys have largely been sort of subdued. The Danish fleet arrives too late to really be of any assistance, does a bit of raiding in the north, and then heads home.
With their hope of support diminishing and William back in the country, Ralph and Roger knew they had lost. Ralph escaped to Brittany, but his wife Emma held out here in Norwich Castle, which still sits in the centre of the city today, being a stereotypical Norman castle.
Emma defended the castle for a while, but then negotiated safe passage to Brittany in exchange for the castle itself. The same, however, could not be said about Roger and Wolthioff. William managed to capture Roger and imprisoned him for life. Although Wolthioff fled abroad, William tricked him into thinking that he would be forgiven if he came back and submitted. When Wolthioff did, William must have run out of patience, as we found out earlier, was beheaded on St Giles Hill in Winchester in 1076, the only public execution under William's rule.
Wolthioff suffers more. This is his third go at rebellion, and it really isn't something that William wants to hold with anymore, and he is sentenced to death and is executed by beheading.
This event showed to William that he had to be careful of his own followers. Norman lords seemed to be jealous of William's power, and future rebellions could be from Normans themselves. When Wolthioff was beheaded up here on St Giles Hill, a decade after the Battle of Hastings, the best hope of further Anglo-Saxon rebellion died with him. The only thing that is a reminder and recounts the events of the 31st of May 1076 is this plaque, which sits on the viewpoint up here in Winchester St Giles Hill. But what's more important about this revolt is that Anglo-Saxons actually helped William. This shows that in just 10 years, William had the support of some Anglo-Saxons. His grasp on England seemed to be paying off, further securing his kingdom.